All right. So, first question, getting into the nitty gritty. So, as we're telling your story, I like to go back to right to the beginning. So, it'd be great if you could tell the audience a little bit about your childhood. And I think this is particularly poignant with thyroid disease because, like, as you know, there's so many factors that contribute to you ending up with it and ending up with symptoms that are bad enough that you notice. So, it'd be interesting to hear like what your childhood was like and whether you think anything from that contributed to your thyroid disease.
Ooh, that's a really good question. Yeah, I love that one. Actually, I have never been asked that on a podcast before. So thank you for asking me that. Well, first of all, I want to say what's up. Thank you so much for inviting me to be on your show today. And I want to say thank you to everyone that's listening, either live or on the replay. My name is Sarah Lohman, and just a little like background really fast before we go into that.
Mm-hmm.
I am actually 42 years old and I'm a proud single mom of two kids. And I have been born and raised in San Diego, but I currently live in Utah. And it's good. It's good here. I'm a certified transformational nutrition coach with a degree in health and fitness. And I focus on helping women that are battling hyperthyroidism, and Hashimotos, or to simply put it, I'm also, like you, a thyroid coach. So, I don't talk about my childhood often, but there are definitely some factors. I can't necessarily say factors that played into my symptoms, but I can say that there were some factors that helped set the stage for me to become a coach. And at the time, I never would have thought about this, and it's really fun to reminisce on. So my mom, I don't know. I've asked her many times, like, what got her into like her health niche or like her health kicks. And I've never really gotten a straight answer. But when I was growing up, we would eat just all the like blah cereals, like Wheaties, grape nuts, Cheerios, and we never had dairy in the house. I literally was raised dairy free. My mom did not buy cow's milk. So we either, in the majority of the time, we ate our cereal with orange juice, with orange
Oh
juice
my
on.
gosh.
Yeah. And since I didn't know, I never tasted it with milk. I didn't know any difference, and I liked it. Like I thought it was great. I would have Raisin Bran with orange juice or Wheaties, and it was fine. And but there was a couple months where we would go to a local farm and we would buy fresh goat's milk. And I remember not really, as a kid, it was too pungent. I can handle it more now as an adult, but I was like, "Ugh." So I don't think that went over well with me and my two brothers. But yeah, I remember the first time I had like real cereal when I was like a teenager, and I spent the night at my friend's house, and I was like, "What's Fruit Loops with milk?" Yeah, so it's really interesting. And one of my favorite memories, you guys, because I was born in 1979, so I'm like full on 80s baby, right? So we had like the station wagon, the big white station wagon, and back in those days, first of all, there was no seatbelts, and second of all, the station wagons had like these benches that you would sit in as a kid and look out the back window. So we would like make faces at the people driving and stuff, and my mom would be like, "Okay, you guys, come on, we gotta go to the store." And that meant like for us, we went to the health food store. And at the time it was called Boney's. And us little kids, we always had like a dirty mind around that. We called it other names. And we were like, hee, hee, hee. And I just remember walking into the health food store and that smell. I don't know if you guys know that smell, but there's like the particular smell of the vitamin department. There's like this musty smell that's very familiar. I even smell it now when I go to the health food store. And, we were just crazy little kids running around, and I would sneak treats out of the bulk bins, and I'd be eating like the chocolate covered almonds and stuff. But that was what I was exposed to, and my mom was very much my health hero. And she set such a fantastic example. She would make fried chicken and mashed potatoes for the family, and she would sit down and eat a salad. And I noticed these things as a kid. And as I got older, we never really talked about it or bonded on it, but I just noticed she would always ride her bike. She would go on these huge bike rides. She was very fitness and health minded, but like on her own. She didn't push it on anyone else. And so growing up and trying to so eat healthy or shop at health food stores was very easy for me. It was just second nature. And my mom is now 71 and she goes to the gym every day. She does yoga. She eats insanely healthy. And she looks 10 years, 15 years younger than she actually is, because she's just always gone out of her way to take care of herself. And it has set such a huge example, especially watching her age, of what having good nutrition and good health practices and good self-care practices can and does do for you as you age. And I love her every day for that. And I'm like, you're the best mom. And so now I'm setting that example for my daughter, and I love that.
That's amazing. It's good to have those role models early on, maybe apart from the cereal and orange juice, but you know, we've all got our things.
Right? Yeah, it is so wonderful. And so I always remind my clients, like, as you transition and you start changing your health and you start changing your diet and you start shopping and you start meal prepping and bulk, cooking, and you do these things, you're going to show your kids how to eat better and how to live better. And as you expose them to these things, you might not think it's going in, but it is. It's going
Yeah, they're
in.
sponges.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so it sounds like you had like a great kind of start to life health wise. When did your symptoms start? When did your thyroid issues start?
Yeah. So that started in do you remember the 2008 crash?
Yeah, I was like maybe 12 or something, but
Yeah, exactly. Okay. So, but it's kind of one of those moments that's been like burned in everyone's mind. So my story starts when I was in my late 20s. I suffered through the 2008 crash. When I say suffered, I mean, we literally, like, everything that could happen to someone in the 2008 crash, like, happened to me and my husband. I married a boy from high school in 2002. I was 23. I hated birth control, didn't believe in it. So I got pregnant, had my son a couple days after my 25th birthday. And, we just did what every young family was doing, trying to figure out how to work and balance the baby and pay our bills and have a nice life. And so the 2008 crash, my husband lost his job. Um, our house was taken out from under us because the landlord stopped paying the rent and didn't tell us. And through all of this, my husband just sort of drifted into this party world with a lot of the other men in our town, in our neighborhood, that were in similar situations. And I ended up suffering from like a really terrible extramarital affair. And it was that whole situation where I had to, leave my home. My husband, it had these different women. It was just absolutely a nightmare. And it was so the whole thing lasted about 6 months. And it was after probably like 3 months after things started settling back down, that I started having mystery pains in my forearms, like in my forearms and my legs. And it was that started for about 2 weeks. And I thought it was just like, maybe it's just my job, because at the time I was a receiving manager for this company called, well, I better not say it. It was a big like alcohol retail company in California. And so I lifted a lot of cases of beer, cases of champagne, down stacking pallets. And then I did a lot of data entry. So I was thinking maybe it was just my job, maybe I'm just really like overdoing it at work. And then the severe like fatigue started kicking in. So I remember I'd sit at my desk with like cold packs on my arms while I was like typing my invoices and doing my POs and stuff. And after a few weeks, I was like, okay, this just doesn't seem right. And one of the things that happened in the 2008 crash, I bet a lot of your listeners will remember, is those of us that were working full time, the company started forcing us from full time to part time. They took away all of our benefits are vacations, bonuses, and they basically said, if you want to keep your job, you have to do it in half the time, with none of your benefits. And it was just highway robbery, basically, right?
And then you're
So
trying to be a mom as well.
yeah, right, exactly. So, with everything I'd gone through, with my husband losing my job, my marriage falling apart, and I didn't want to lose my job on top of it, so I just basically sucked it up. And so I didn't have any medical insurance. So this all started right after I lost my medical insurance. So I didn't know what to do. Thankfully, my friend at the time was my manager. We were managers together of the store. And I asked her, I was honestly thinking it was like from work. I was like, maybe I should workman comp this out. So she's like, all right, I'll file a claim. So a few days later, she's like, okay, your claim got approved. Go to this urgent care after work today. I'm like, okay. So I'll never, ever forget this trip. I don't, anyone that's been diagnosed, I almost feel like that moment is like ingrained in our brain, but almost like in slow motion,
Yeah.
because it's so shocking. So I'm sitting on the crunchy paper, I'm in the office sitting on the crunchy paper, and the doctor comes in he just had this whole arrogant vibe about him, and he sits down and he's like, so what's going on today, Mrs. Lohman, and he has his clipboard, and I'm like, well, I got this pain, and da 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 da. And he's like, well, I'm gonna check your thyroid. And I was like, what? Like, what?
Yeah, it's kind of random, to be fair. Usually they don't test your thyroid, even when you're like, I've got all these symptoms.
Yeah, I guess you could say I kind of lucked out like that, because most doctors are like, whatever, you're just stressed out, right? And I've had that gaslighting as well. So I'm gonna check your thyroid, I'm gonna check your TSH, and I never experienced this before. So they call me down to the little lab, they come and get me. And by the way, it was the worst lab draw I've ever had. The girl must have like been fresh off the boat, like maybe her second blood draw. It was so painful. It was so painful. So that unfortunately set the stage for me having multiple panic attacks, getting my blood drawn after that. And how often you have to get your blood drawn when you go through this hoopla. So it was like constant panic attacks in the lab. Anyway, so 30 minutes goes by, gets my results back, and he's like, all right, your TSH is at like a 7.52 or whatever. You have low thyroid. So follow up with your primary doctor, get him on some medication, and, just go from there. And it was just like, just rushed, didn't give a shit, nonchalant. Yeah. Here's your diagnosis, runs out the door.
Yeah.
Right. And I'm sitting there on the crunchy paper all by myself. And it was like, that movie Sandlot? So there's that part in the movie Sandlot where it goes into slow-mo and the cop's mouth is like zoomed in on, and he's like, forever. Well, that's what like the words seemed like. It was like, hypothyroidism. And I'm just sitting there like in shock, and I can hear it going like, wah, wah. And I'm like, I really honestly like should have had someone with me right then to advocate, because that's normal. You go into a stage of shock when you hear these things, and it's like you have an out-of-body experience. And that's why you need someone there taking notes, asking questions, supporting you. So he basically leaves, and I'm just sitting there like dumbfounded. And I felt just sad. I felt depressed. I felt worried. And then I was more like upset because he's like, oh, go to your primary doctor and get medicine. And I'm like, he didn't even give me a chance to say, I don't have a primary doctor. Can you just send something in? Or like nothing. He just bailed on me. So I go home, and this is like the fatigue had gotten so bad at this point. I called it my hypo drag, or I called it dragon ass. And so I went home. Obviously, I just worked and went through that. And I was like, I'm going to get in the bath. So I remember getting in the bathtub, and I was just sitting there, like still in shock, didn't know what to do. And I was crying. And then I remember like thinking, well, I've been in here for a while. I should probably get out and go check on my son. and I don't know if you've ever experienced this, but I was so tired. I had like such little energy. I felt like I couldn't even get myself out of bath.
Mm.
And it almost turned into like a scary moment because I was like, oh my gosh, how am I going to get out of the bath? And that was like, it was bad. And it was like, where did my energy go? Like, what has happened to me? You know, it was so scary. So I mustered up the energy and pulled myself out of the bath, and it just collapsed on the bed in my towel. And so I didn't know what to do. And I thought and thought and thought. And the next morning I was like, okay, I'm going to call the urgent care back and just explain to him what's going on with me. So I did. I called him back. It was a new doctor, new shift the next morning. And I told him, this is what happened last night. This is what the guy said. I don't have a primary. He wanted me to get meds. I don't know, you know, and he was like, so nice, thankfully. And this guy was like, sure. You know, do you know what medication you want? And I was like, I chose Armor thyroid. And I was like, he's like, you know, kind of explained it. And I was like, yeah, I want the natural one. So he basically like called it into CVS, and I went and got it. And I remember it was $20, and I picked it up and I opened the bottle. I was sitting in my truck and I took one, and it was like 60 milligrams. And I remember thinking, well, okay, I just got to take this pill the rest of my life. That sucks, but I can do that, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And it was really, that was like, I had no idea then that was just the beginning of an absolute nightmare. And I was suffering every year. The way I describe it is I went from sick to sicker to sickest over like a 8-year span. And it just seemed like I was trying to combat my symptoms. I was collecting new symptoms every year. The doctors literally were worthless, straight up worthless. My levels were always perfect, yet I still was experiencing more and more symptoms. And it got to the point where I felt like I was in a prison from my own anxiety and panic attacks. And the fatigue had gotten so bad by 2015. So I was diagnosed in 2009 with hypothyroidism. And by 2015, I was so weak and full of so anxious that I was having panic attacks at work, like trying to talk to customers. I was still in the same job. Mm-hmm. And I just couldn't even do my job anymore. So I went to the doctor and was like, something's seriously wrong with me. Like I have no energy. And and it was like, I think by that time I had at least 18 symptoms, the brain fog, the memory loss, the anxiety, the panic attacks, the, like I said, the fatigue, the constipation. I collected a lot of food sensitivities or straight up intolerances. And so I asked my doctor, I'm like, I need to get taken out on disability. And like most of everyone else, I was completely gaslighted. And he was like, you're just depressed, and I'm like, yeah, I'm depressed. This sucks. I can't function. But that's not why I'm here. I'm not depressed. It's upsetting to live this way, but something is seriously wrong with me. And so he was convinced that I just needed some Xanax or something and to see a shrink. So I was super angry at him, but I could see that he wanted me to play his game. So I was so tired. I had such little energy that I couldn't even move the steering wheel to steer.
Wow.
And I had to ask my mother-in-law to basically drive me everywhere at this point. And so thankfully, she was so sweet, and she would drive me to my appointments, and she would watch my son and just really helped out. And so there was this one, so I went to the therapist, and I explained to her everything that was going on. And I was very clear because I've always just had a lot of good intuition and strong approach when it comes to the medical community, because I learned really quickly that they're not there to help you, and you have to really advocate for yourself in order to number one, get the proper treatment, and number two, not get labeled inappropriately. And so I made it very clear to this woman that I was not a depressive person. I don't have a depressive personality. I was just struggling with da 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 da. And that's absolutely been frustrating and upsetting, and it's robbing my life from me, and it's making me upset. I don't know who I am anymore, and all of those feelings that go into it. And so it was interesting how she started, I call it shrinking me. She started shrinking me to death, and she's like, how's your relationship? How's your marriage? And it was like, I was so mad at her. And I literally was like, I do not want to talk to you about this. This is none of your business. And she just was relentless. And she's like, okay, just a little bit, and she was like trying to crack my door open. And, and so I started telling her about how my marriage had gotten worse and worse and worse, after the affairs. And I begrudgingly, like, is that the right word? Like, yeah. I did not want to take him back. I wanted to divorce him and walk out. I knew I didn't deserve to be treated that way. I knew I deserved better, but I felt trapped because of my son. And I didn't want my son to be in a split home with someone who wasn't appropriate. So it was like, I almost felt like I had to sacrifice myself and stay with him in order to protect my baby.
And I think it's so interesting you've used that word. Like, self-sacrifice is such a common theme that I see with Hashimoto's, hypothyroidism, and like the Hashi personality, quote unquote, which is just a trauma response. But like the amount of self-sacrifice that has happened before your body gets into the state, it's just in everyone's story.
Absolutely. You're right. And it is something that is definitely why I approach the spiritual aspect of healing, because I'll get to it in my story, because one of the things that I recognize in myself that I see in a lot of my clients too is they're spiritually sick. Okay, so I'll get to that. Or if I don't, remind me to loop back to it. so this lady started digging in, and I'd went through some more really, really horrible experiences with my husband where I actually had him arrested, and the DA was trying to get me to go testify against him in a trial and put him in prison. I moved out. I mean, it was really bad, and I've learned now that he was some form of a narcissist, and he experienced a lot of trauma and abuse in his childhood from his father, and he was just repeating the patterns. Yeah. And it was miserable, and I was absolutely terrified of him. He was an alcoholic. I was physically scared of him. He was emotionally abusive, physically abusive. It was terrible. And I didn't want to let her in on that. I didn't want to open up to a professional who was going to try to shrink me. That's the way I looked at it. And I was so narrow-minded at the time, or I was, not to be offensive, but I was like everyone else, just thinking that things were separate. I was thinking that, what did my, when she was asking me things, oh, what would that have to do with me being sick or anxious or fatigued, or unable to work, and I'm sitting here trying to just fix my physical body. And she probably saw the bigger picture a lot, way more than I did. And so I was keeping it vague with her. But she was adamant about going into the relationship, and it just made me angry. I didn't want to talk about it. And so she closed the session and she approved my whatever. And so my doctor was like, sure, I'll take you out on disability. So I took all my disability money, poured it into a naturopath. She worked out of a spa, and she was young, and I really vibed with her. And she was adamant about figuring out what was going on with me. I loved her motivation, right? So she was like pulling every lab under the sun. And she was like, oh my gosh, you have Hashimoto's. Oh my gosh, you have leaky gut. Look how low your nutrients are. You don't absorb anything, and like,
I had the same experience with a
yeah,
naturopath.
and it was shocking because I was like pounding fruit, pounding salads. Like I ate nothing but organic. My ex used to yell at me every time I came home with all these organic vegetables because he thought I was spending all this ridiculous amount of money on nothing. And like I was doing all the trendy things and I was taking all the supplements and like I was trying to do all the right things. And so for her to be, she literally asked me, do you even eat protein? And I was like, are you crazy? I eat so much protein every day. And she's like, it's not showing on your labs. And I was
I'm
like,
like necking protein shakes.
yeah. And I'm like, are you serious? And like, she was the one that opened up my eyes to EBV infection. And so it was really educational. And at the time, I had no idea how to piece all these things together. I was just relying on her to do it. And then she started asking me questions about my relationship one day. I was sitting there and because she was like, I need to give you some vitamin pushes. I need to give you some B12 shots. And she just basically started shoving nutrients literally down my veins. And so I'm sitting there with my arm out and she's like shoving this huge syringe full of like nutrients up my veins. And she's like, how's your marriage? How's your relationship? And I'd worked with, I felt I wasn't so angry at her. So I actually opened up to her and I started telling her some things about how unhappy I was. And I'll never forget, she was like, oh, honey, I'm going to get you better so you can get yourself out of that situation. And I remember I was like, oh my gosh, did she just say that? Like it wasn't even a thing in my head at that time to like leave him. Like I knew I was going to leave him at some point. I was thinking when my son was 18 and my son was only like 7 or 8, or I don't remember. But I remember thinking like, oh, she took me back at that. And I can say it definitely made me start questioning things, of like, why would she say that? And now that was the second practitioner that said that to me, I'm like, what is going on here? So I worked with her for like 6 months and she got me out of like bedridden state and on my feet. I didn't feel safe. I didn't feel safe in my body to go back to work at this point. So I just didn't. I think I filed for unemployment or something and got it, so I was getting disability. I think I was getting unemployment. My husband worked and we lived with his parents still. So it was like, okay for me not to have to go back to work. Because everyone liked me taking care of the house and cooking dinners and everything anyways. So I was like, whatever. And I just basically had conceded to the idea that I was going to be sick forever. And I remember that turning point in my mind where I was like, I've done everything I can do. I've maxed out at Eastern and Western. I've tried all the compounded medications I can, all the dosages I can. Nothing's fixing me. So I guess this is it. And I'm just gonna be sick forever. And then I started almost like convincing myself of it because I was like, there was this period where it was like, it seemed like this wave of thyroid illness that went through my family. Like I found out my cousin was really sick for a year and the doctors couldn't figure out what was wrong with her. And then they're like, oh, it's a thyroid illness. My brother was diagnosed with Hashimoto's. My mom was put on thyroid medication. And my aunt, I had 2 of my aunts. So it was like, I started thinking like, well, shit, this is just genetic and I'm just screwed. My body's defective. My genes are defective. So I guess I'll just let this thing kill me if that's what's going to happen,
You just feel so powerless.
I did. I lost all my hope. I felt faulty and definitely powerless. So when you get to that point, that's straight up depression. It's like, I didn't even know who I was anymore. I was a shell of myself. And every day I just wish to be myself again. And I think that is probably the hardest psychological point to be into, when you're just encompassed in that hopelessness, helplessness, missing yourself, and depression. And, you looking around at all these professionals that are supposed to be the ones that help you, fix you, and we put them on pedestals. But in all honesty, all they do is make you feel like shit or don't help you at all. So you're just like, okay, well, if I can't rely on them, then I'm just, okay, that's it, I'm screwed. So it was about 5 months later, after all of that, my brother, I have two older brothers, my my best friend brother, we were so tight growing up our whole lives. He did some stupid stuff in his 20s, and he was sentenced to 10 years in prison. So he finally, and like through all of my illness and everything, I was caring for him in prison, and I was actually advocating for his Hashimotos while he was in prison, because he was struggling so much with his symptoms and his energy and stuff. And so when he got out, it was like, oh, such a weight off of my shoulders. I didn't have to worry about him and send him packages and money and envelopes and all the things I had to do for him all the time. And of course he was back, and I was like, yay, he's in my life. It was so exciting. And my husband at the time, he hated him, and he did everything he could to like stop me and like make me feel horrible and not see him.
That sounds like a classic narcissist, peeling off
Right?
your support network.
Yep. Oh, thank you. So, I was torn because he was so mean to me. I didn't want to give him more reason to abuse me. But at the same time, it was like, F you, I'm going to see my bro. He's been locked up for 10 freaking years, and I love this man. So I did plan some things and spend some time with him, and it was amazing. But I just sort of talked to him over the phone, and it was about a year and a half. He reacclimated, I thought, very well. He got on his feet super quick. He was like a foreman. He had a girlfriend. He got a place. He got a truck. He had a cell phone, but I knew he was struggling emotionally. Like he really felt left behind, like, like, oh, look at everyone else. They have a family and kids and all these things. So it was like he was trying to hurry and make up for lost time.
Mm-hmm.
But there was this one day he called me, or I called him, because I was just so sick and I knew he could relate. And he started sharing with me how he was not doing well, and that his energy levels were super low. And he was like, sis, how am I going to be able to keep up with my job where I'm up on the roofs installing air conditionings and like 100-degree weather, like 12, 14-hour days? He's like, I can't do it. And so the next thing I know, like just a month later or so, I get a call out of the blue from his friend, who was like a mutual friend. And then his friend calls me and was like, Sarah, your brother's on drugs and he's not doing good. And I'm like, oh my gosh, what? No, no. And so I find out, I call him. So I call him, I hang up with the friend and I call him, and he answers. And it was so static, and instantly tell he was high. I didn't know what on, but I was like, oh, what is happening, And so I call his girlfriend. I'm like, what is going on? And she kind of spills the beans. She's like, yeah, it started like 2 weeks ago. I could tell he was using, I think it's methamphetamines. And then like that conversation of like not having energy kicked back in my head. And I'm like, oh my gosh, oh my gosh, oh my gosh. So me and his girlfriend kind of corner him and say, like, if you don't go to rehab, like, she's like, I'm going to break up with you. I'm going to kick you out. Go to rehab, just try to, the loving push or whatever intervention. And he was like off his rocker. I guess he wasn't sleeping. And he basically cussed me out. Like I remember he would, because she did that. She kicked him out and she was like, go to your own place and I'm not going to be with you unless you get clean. And he must have been driving home or something from that conversation, super angry. He called me, and this was not like him. And he was just like cussing me out and how dare I interfere with his life and da 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 da. And he was like, you're not my sister anymore. Like words I'd never heard him say. And I was so sad and I was bawling. And I was up all night worried about him, didn't know what to do. I woke up the next morning, I felt like crap because I was so tired and I was still worried about him. And I'm texting him. I wake him up, texting him. No response, no response. So I go through the whole day and I'm still just like worried, don't know what's going on. And the next thing I know, that evening, I get a call, and the lady who was renting a room out from, she's like, Sarah, I just want you to know that your brother has passed away.
Oh my gosh.
The story gets me every time. Sorry.
Sending you a big cuddle.
I know, thank you. He was shot and killed that morning by the San Diego Police Department. And it was all over the news. And she was like, turn on the news.
Oh, wow.
And I was like, so I was in a different county. It was San Diego County. I was in Riverside County. So I had to actually go online to like get the San Diego news. And it was literally everywhere, every news outlet. And it was like this whole thing where like this police car chase and the shootout and this whole like car chase through the town, and they'd shot him 14 times. And it was just so like next level traumatic. And so fast forward 6 months. So I went through hell with like media, detectives, investigations, getting the reports. And then they did this final live, the Cox did a final live newscast where they came out and they discussed the issues around his death, and they deemed it a good kill, and that they closed his case, and that was it.
Wow.
And that was my turning point. That showed me how short and precious life really is. And it woke me up and gave me a new perspective of like, what am I doing?
Mm-hmm.
I hate my life. I hate my husband. I hate my house. I hate my in-laws. I don't want to be here. What am I doing? And it was just like, in this moment, I made this decision to change everything in my life. And the way I like to call it is I dropped a bomb, a nuclear bomb on my life. I told my husband I was done and I was filing for divorce. I started selling everything because remember, I wasn't working. So I had no saved money, no job. I started selling all my stuff. I sold my blender, I sold my juicer, I sold my bike, my beach cruiser, all the things I loved. And I didn't care because I was like, I'm out. And I started texting anyone and everyone I could have like, hey, you got a spare room? Can I move in? Like, that's how determined I was.
Yeah.
And the girl across the street, 2 houses down, she had a spare room and she's like, sure, you can move in. So I gave her all my money, my $500, and I moved in across the street. And I was like, I'm done. And it was the most liberating, absolutely incredible moment in my life. And I can.
Oh.
And I started feeling better.
Oh, hang on. You dropped out there for a sec.
Uh-oh.
I think you're back now.
Okay, sorry.
That's all right. So you said it was the most incredible moment of your life.
Yeah, when I just made that, when I'd moved out and I realized that I was done. And so it was like, okay, well, what do I want? So naturally, the first thing I wanted to do was go to school and go back to school for something in health and nutrition. And so I didn't know what I was going to be, but I knew I wanted to do something in the health industry. So, so I got my degree in so I got my first, that was my first round. So that's the health and nutrition that I got. And then I thought it was to be a registered dietitian, but I took a look at the food guide pyramid and I went through like some of the basic nutritional classes in college and I was like, hell no. I was like, I don't even eat this way. I can't teach people to eat this way. I was like, I don't even believe in this.
Yeah, I thought the same thing.
Yeah, I'm like, okay, this is definitely not my path, And I'm like, what do I do? Because there's not a lot of options out there for, the health industry. And I mean, in like mainstream college,
Yeah.
And so I moved back home, and I made all these moves that made me so happy. You know, I actually started dating a boy, my brother's best friend from high school, that I had a crush on like in ninth grade. And he was such a wonderful person for me in that moment. And I will forever be grateful for everything he provided me. He really was like my white knight that like came in and swooped me up and saved me. It was so amazing. And so once I basically got myself safe, I started looking at myself and going, okay, why do I have bloating every day? Why do I have constipation? Why do I still have low energy often? Why do I have heat sensitivities? You know, why? And I'm like, why do I have anxiety to drive and all my symptoms? You know, I still had a lot. And still trying to figure out the medical thing. And I was like, well, maybe I could do this, you know, and I like hired a couple more doctors. And it was such a waste of money. It was literally such a waste of money. And that's when I was like, okay, literally, that's it. I am done. I was like, I'm not going to see another doctor the rest of I decided to fix myself.
The internet keeps cutting out.
Yeah, I see that. You keep freezing a little bit.
I'll just ask my other half to just turn the TV off in case Netflix is doing it.
Oh no. So
I think he's just got home with my son, so they've turned the TV on, and now it's probably like eating all the Wi-Fi. Ah.
yeah, okay. So I basically just gave, the way I like to say it is I gave the medical systems the middle fingers, and I decided that I was going to fix myself. So I literally did that. I just started studying all kinds of different things, and I figured out that I could start pulling my own labs. And I was like, I felt like a kid in the candy store when I was like, what? I have access to all of this stuff. Granted, I had to use another practitioner's portal and her license to get access to them, but it was really cool. So since I was in school, I was getting a lot of government grants, and I would use some of that grant money that I was living off of in order to pull labs. And one by one, I started getting all these answers back. And it was, for me, it was like finding the pieces to my puzzle. And it was like, okay, this told me this told me that, this told me this told me that, or I learned this from that. And it was like a year straight where I just guinea pigged myself with all this testing. And I remember thinking like, oh, maybe I should go back to a GI specialist and get his opinion on this. And, you know, getting into the gut infections and stuff. And I was like, yeah, you know, maybe maybe I need some help with this. And so I did it again, against my own better judgment. And I went to like this naturopathic clinic in San Diego, which actually was really rad. And I just was so put off by all of the things that the specialist was telling me to do. And I just knew intuitively that he was wrong. And so I was like, back to me. So I started following, really heavily playing with herbs, specific herbs, specific foods. And I remember I shifted. This is when I really started shifting my outlook on food. And I no longer looked at food as a source of pain or just a source of survival. It was medicine. It turned into my food is my medicine. Mm-hmm. And it was not even just food, it was drinks too, you know, teas and infusions and juicing and all of the different things that you can do with food. And I can tell you that I successfully reversed 25 symptoms. I wrote them down. I had 25 symptoms. And it was like unbelievable. I was so angry that I wasted like so much time on doctors, when within the time span of just a few months, I started reversing significant symptoms myself. And a lot of the prolonged healing that I've had to go through, honestly, was more mental, emotional, and spiritual. After I was able to deal with the physical symptoms. So I graduated both of my schools. I had a dual graduation that COVID robbed me of in December 2019. We were shut down and we were on lockdown. And so I spent like the next 6 months just building Coach Share Joy from the ground up. And it is now my absolute passion, mission, drive, motivating force for why I get out of bed every single morning and do what I do all day long to successfully support, educate, and help other women do the same thing. Because in my opinion, thyroid conditions it's just out of control. There's so many factors to it. I feel like it's like a silent pandemic that's actually happening to women, and no one's talking about it. No one cares about it. Big pharma is just raking in the money on it. They boast about how much their thyroid medication profits are going to increase on their, yearly sales and projected sales that you can read in their blogs. It's disgusting. And there's so much more. There's so many factors behind why everyone's getting sick and suffering. And I can tell you that it's not just quote unquote thyroid illness.
And that's the thing. It's like it's only going to get more and more with everything that's going on in the world and the way that it operates and all the industries that are profiting off very immoral things, and like also just the stress and all the global trauma we're all going through at the moment. I mean, even what's happening on the news in the US for women's bodies and women's rights at the moment. It's definitely a time to understand why it happens and how to help it and how to help yourself,
Yes, absolutely. I agree so much.
And I know that a big part of what you do is looking at getting to the root cause, what has triggered it for you. And that is the only way to bring your body back to balance. Otherwise it does just keep getting worse forever. Like that's just the reality. And so it'd be great to just hear quickly, like what root causes you feel like were affecting you the most, and also what you kind of like to share with people that they may not know about that could be triggering their Hashimotos or hypothyroidism.
Yeah, so there was some very prevalent things that I uncovered in my testing. And the first one that really stood out to me was pathogen infections. Okay. There's multiple different ways we can have infections. We can have infections in our glands, in our organs. So like, I truly believe that we have infections in our thyroid glands, directly in our glands. I tested myself for the Epstein-Barr. It was like when I started doing all of my root causes, I remembered that naturopath doctor telling me you have the Epstein-Barr virus. And I remember thinking, it was significant. Something was significant enough in my testing for her to say that to me. And then she put me on Monolaurin, which is an antiviral supplement for 1 month. And I remember thinking back to that. Well, if she found that then I should probably look into that. So I went to my doctor at the time. I had a PA he did what I said. I loved it. And so I was like, hey, Jay, and this was the other thing I stopped. You know, because I took him off his pedestal. And I was like, I really want to pull my EBV antibodies. And there's only 3 tests you can pull. And so he was like, yeah, sure. You know, and so I got the results back and I was like, holy crap, they were all really high. They were like in the, I mean, I've had clients that have had much higher, but mine were like in the 300-400s. And I was like, oh my gosh, you know, this is really high. And so then I started pulling my thyroid antibodies, and those were also significantly high. And I started studying the correlation between the two. And I was like, okay, this is a thing, you know. And like when I started learning about my testing and root causes, antibodies was one of the ones I started studying, because everyone says, oh, when you have Hashimotos, you know, your body's attacking itself, and you know, because you have high antibodies. And so that's what I used to think too, until I started seeing the correlations. So as I started to address my EBV through antiviral protocols, okay, which are antiviral foods, antiviral herbs, okay, and this is why I said medicine. I started looking at food as medicine. So what are some antiviral foods? Fruits, blueberries, right? Apples, lemons, limes, you know, all these things that are like ridiculously high nutrients that support.
Everyone cuts them out because they're worried about sugar because they're gaining weight. And then that's the kind of ironic thing about it.
Yeah, no, I never, ever, ever look at that, because it's not the same thing. That sugar is not the same thing. It's fructose, which goes into glucose, and you have to have glucose to live. You know, the sugars you got to be scared of are, you know, pounding pizzas and bread and the chocolates and the candies and the Starbucks. Okay. Not a freaking apple. You know, I literally will buy a watermelon, cut it in half, scoop out all the guts, put it in my blender, and drink 32 ounces of watermelon. I mean, that's as, you know, much sugar as you can get, but it is the healing sugar. That's the way I look at it, you know? And so I started tracking my thyroid antibodies versus my EBV bodies. And guess what? As I healed one, the other came down as well. So my EBV started coming down, and so did my thyroid antibodies. And I've been able to get my TPO antibodies down to like a 10, you know, like from hundreds. Yeah. And so that was a factor. And then gut infections. So one of the programs that I have right now, because I learned this from my own trial, is gut infections are a thing. Okay, so a lot of people hear, oh, gut infections, and yes, that's what I'm speaking to right now. But so then I'm talking about, then that's what I started finding. I was having an overgrowth and problems with H. pylori and SIBO and E. coli, which E. coli is actually a good bacteria, but if it gets too out of control, that's when it turns into an overgrowth, and that's when it hurts you. So it was like, okay, here's another factor, right? So those were separate. The EBV was not in my gut. It was in my organs and my glands. But then I had other infections in my gut. And so on the gut test that I offer now, one of the things that I've uncovered also that I need people to understand, because this is not something most people talk about, is we're not just dealing with gut infections. What I see the most in my clients is we're dealing with depletions. Okay, so our gut needs to have 200 different strains of bacteria in order to be like absolutely optimal. That's the highest amount of bacteria you can get, 200. The average woman is walking around with like 140, 146. Okay, so think about how many are missing. That's a huge gap.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't mean low, I mean usually straight missing. Okay, so if you're missing 40, 50 plus strains of bacteria you're supposed to have to function, no wonder you're having problems, right?
Yeah.
And then not only am I seeing straight missing bacteria, but the ones that most people have are very low. And this definitely goes back to all of the environmental things we talk about. First of all, if you're not eating fiber, if you're not eating fruit, vegetables, and greens, and whole food based carbs, sweet potatoes, squash, your gut is going to get depleted because that they thrive on those things, not protein. Protein actually hurts your gut. High amount of protein, that's actually not good for your gut. We need our fibers. That's what they eat, and they chomp it up, and then they thrive and they're happy, and then you thrive and you're happy. And a lot of women I talk to, like, fruit is just almost non-existent in their life. And I'm like, this isn't okay.
And I think
need
a lot of it has come from all these bad messages that people are being fed. Like I saw another one of your posts, which I also agree with, which is like everyone thinks that they can't eat salt. And it's like, no, you can't eat the crap salt, the processed salt that's been added to all the processed food. Like if you're having sea salt, Himalayan rock salt with your food, then that's great. Like you need that. Your adrenals need that. And like there's so many messages like this, like the don't eat sugar, don't eat salt. Like so many things that are, it's like the media that's the problem. And like you said about the industries that are a problem, even coffee is another one. Like coffee isn't bad, but if you're having moldy coffee, yeah, it's bad.
Exactly. The fruit fear is real. And it's been brought on by like the trendy diets that have scared women away from fruit. But yeah, like I'm here to say, like, please eat a ton of organic fruit. Like you will feel better. It's like a no-brainer. So some of the other things that I see significantly with my clients is the imbalance of mineral to metal ratios. I mean, women, our diets are lacking, our water is dead and stripped, and so they're not eating enough fruit, they're not eating enough veggies, they're not eating enough salads, they're living on carbs, they're living on sugar, they're living on protein. And the outcome of that is your nutrients, your magnesium, your calcium, your sodium, your potassium, your zinc, your selenium, manganese, phosphorus, everything is going to reflect your poor nutrition choices, right? And so my clients are like, and even myself, when I got my hands on my hair tissue mineral analysis test myself, I was insanely depleted. And again, it was because, and I mean, I had a really good diet, and it was like another test that showed me I was not absorbing. So I've had to really work on my gut to be able to absorb what I'm eating and actually utilize the nutrients in the food. But more importantly, I've had to work on my stomach. Everyone, from what I'm seeing, everyone has almost like no HCl in their stomach. Their stomach digestion blends are just, they're like horrible.
And then I think that, like you said, you can be eating all the right things and it's not going to make any difference because you're not absorbing it. So,
and the reason why you're not absorbing it is because you're usually super deficient in your minerals. And when you're deficient in your minerals, you don't have proper stomach acids to digest and break down your food. And then when your gut's missing bacteria and it's infected, then it's not working properly. So that's, that explained to me why it was like, oh my gosh, how, I'm doing everything right, but it still wasn't reflecting, right? So working on increasing your minerals, your sodium, your potassium, your selenium, which, I don't just suggest people go and start taking all these things. You need to have a baseline and start with a test and get your baseline so you can do a tailored protocol for you. So you don't take too much, or, so what you're doing. Because when you take, people need to understand, when you're taking supplements, when you're taking vitamins, especially minerals, you are changing and altering your biochemistry in one way or another. And if you do it tailored specifically to your test results, It's the best way to do it. You're altering it to what exactly you need. And that's beautiful. Right. And then you can retest and you can see your progress actually benefiting. And then you feel yourself getting better on top of seeing the progress physically on your test. And it's just such a win-win.
Yeah.
And you're like, okay, this is amazing.
And it's draining
So,
to stab in the dark as well. And you could also be pushing yourself too far, because a lot of the vitamins and minerals, you know, they work in a harmony and in a balance. And if you have too much of one, especially with like metals, then it stops like other things being able to work properly. So you can end up in a hot mess.
right, exactly. So I'm consistently seeing high aluminum, high mercury. I'm consistently seeing toxic or copper, excuse me, copper toxicity, which also is a deficiency at the same time. And these imbalances, especially the copper, is a mineral. It's a emotional based mineral, and that's when you'll feel like you can't get a handle on your moods. You know, you could be deficient. I know it sounds strange, but you can be toxic and deficient in your copper at the same time. And this is why a lot of women struggle with anemia that they can't get under control, because your copper is what helps you. Having proper copper storage is what helps you absorb your iron and sustain your iron. So and for me, my aluminum was so bad that it when I started balancing, bringing up my minerals, it started naturally pushing up my aluminum. And guess what? My anxiety started disappearing. My anxiety just literally was gone one day as I started to rebalance my body. And I don't feel like a prisoner to anxiety attacks anymore. So I love how when we start repairing one part of ourselves, it starts repairing the other parts, because everything in our body is connected in a beautiful rhythm. And so people say, oh, I'm so overwhelmed and I don't know where to begin and this and that. And it's like, well, honestly, you can start with one thing. You can start with changing your diet and start feeling better in other areas. You can start with repairing your gut, and that will trickle into other areas. Or you can start with your mineral and metal imbalances, and that will trickle into other areas, you know? And so it really isn't that overwhelming. You just have to start is the main thing, right?
Yeah.
And stop putting it off and stop just relying on doctors to medicate you and change your dosages. But the other thing that I told you I wanted to loop back around to that I remembered was my spiritual sickness and I just call it spiritual sickness because that's honestly what it is, in my opinion. And, or I guess you could say poor spiritual nutrition is another interesting way to say it. But when I was in that period where I was working with that doctor in 2015 and I couldn't get better, I remember I called my friend from church and I was like, will you please pray for me? He was actually in college studying Chinese medicine to become an acupuncturist. So I connected with him and he was like, sure, come over that night. So I was like, all right, can your wife watch my daughter? And he was like, sure. So we went over after work and he was like, what's going on? And I told him all of my sickness and everything I was going through. And he was like, all right, and so we started praying together. And I'll never forget, in that prayer, it was told to me that I was spiritually sick, and that's what was making me sick. And at the time, everything was starting to like open and change my perspectives between what the doctors were saying and now this, and I started reflecting on it. And that was that was a piece of me waking up and saying, I'm living with my head in the sand to the fact that I'm so unhappy with my life. And so it was that I felt like I had betrayed myself by staying in a relationship that I knew was disgusting and I deserved so much better, and I hated myself for the choices I made. And I hated myself just for so many things, but it was all revolved around my relationship. And so I chose, after I'd gone through a divorce and everything, I realized after my brother was shot and killed that I'd never healed from my dad's death. My dad literally just up and died too within 24 hours of prostate cancer he was hiding from us. And so I realized I had all this hidden pain, all this trapped, unprocessed grief from my dad's death. And then I had to process the grief from my brother's death. And then because I was, this was a few years after I was out of my marriage. And then I realized I had to heal all of to find myself again and heal from all of the toxic verbal abuse, emotional abuse I'd been through. And so I reached out to a Reiki master in San Diego, and I started working with an energy healer. And that was incredible. It was absolutely incredible, the amount of healing that I was able to do spiritually.
Mm-hmm.
And once I got helped alleviate more symptoms, physically.
Mm-hmm.
So it's all connected.
Yeah.
So those are 3 root reasons that I can share with you right now.
Yeah, and I think it's really powerful to share that. And I found it on my journey too, that like all of the stuff we talked about more at the beginning, like with the nutrition and supplements and all this testing, like it is the foundation and it is what you need to do to get out of survival mode often. But then in order to like heal on a deeper level and sustainably and, get your body back into like thriving mode and feel happy mentally, like you have to address all the emotional stuff. And like, I think Reiki has been mentioned by like every person I've spoken to as well that I've had on about thyroid. Like it's really helped me too. So I think, yeah, thank you so much for vulnerably sharing the emotional side of things too, because it's definitely the side that people don't want to face. Like you shared with your story, you didn't want to face it, but it became one of the key puzzle pieces.
Yeah, absolutely. You're welcome. And I gladly share the nitty-gritty of my details because I know it helps save, and that's what we need as a community. We need to pull together and speak about things we don't want to speak about, because that's where the real transformation begins.
Definitely. Yeah, because you just feel so like isolated and alone in your experience and like nobody else gets it, but there are loads of women out there who get it. And yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Do you have any resources that you could recommend to anyone, like a podcast or a book or anything that someone could get started with?
So on my website, if you guys go to my website, which is coachsarahjoy.com, you'll get the PDF called The 6 Things I Wish I Would Have Been Told After I Was Diagnosed with Hypothyroidism and Hashimotos. And this list is dear to my heart because I wrote it after I'd done all of things that I learned to be true through that process and what I learned to be a lie for women that are battling thyroid illness. Plus, you'll get my video series for greater peace and higher energy. And these videos, there's 4 of them. They are like an easy 8 to 12 minute each video, and they are things during the day to be able to increase your peace and your energy. And just really easy things that we can do that help us on our path to getting better. And if anyone's interested in speaking with me, they can follow me on Instagram at coach.sarah.joy. And I do offer a free 30-minute discovery call if they want to connect with me.
Amazing. That sounds great. Thank you so much for today, Sarah. It's been really eye-opening and heartwarming and heartbreaking all at the same time.
Yeah. Sorry, you keep glitching a little bit.
Oh.
Well, thank you for having me on today. Thank you for listening. Thank you to your audience for listening. I love sharing my story and being able to help any way I can. I also have a YouTube page called Coach Sarah Joy with a lot of educational videos. And I have my podcast as well called Thursday Thyroid Talks.
Awesome. Cool. And I'll link all of those in the show notes so that our listeners can find you. Oh, we've gone again.